Hello, welcome to Artistic Spirit. I'm Katie Moran, and today I'm here with Todd Shaffer, who is a writer director with over 30 years of experience in animation and film. He has worked on hundreds of projects, including featured films, series, commercials, and game cinematics. His expertise spans several mediums, including 2D and 3D animation, live action, motion capture, and stop motion. He has written and directed 3 films, including The Promise, Birth of the Messiah, Prodigal, the musical, and provided the 2D animation direction for Disney's Disenchanted. As a writer, he has sold 5 screenplays, penning lyrics for 28 songs in 2 musicals. Thank you so much for coming today, Todd.
Well, thanks for having me, Katie. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, I definitely am having a bit of word salad today. So I
That's
love
all
when it
right.
just it naturally just is the feelings of the
Yeah,
day. So
that's fine.
I love it. The thing that really has spoken to me about what you talk about is creative discipline and conditioning. And
Mm,
this is something that I see a lot of people get wrong about creativity, is that it's this innate talent rather than something that you condition like any other skill, kind of
yeah,
similar to having a growth mindset with creativity. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
sure. Well, I could tell you that let me first start with talent because talent is something that tripped me up early on in my career or in my life. Because I grew up drawing and creating art, and everyone said, "Oh, you're so talented," and I was. When you compared me to everybody else, I could draw better, create art better than any of my classmates. So I grew up thinking, "Oh, I got this natural talent." But as I got into the industry, I realized that idea of natural talent, one, it doesn't hold water because I've seen so many people who didn't appear to have talent work their rear ends off to get to a certain place and exceed and excel other people who thought they had talent. So if you go like into an art program or like a drawing program, especially in animation, because animation is very specific, you have very specific skill sets that you have to develop. And I've seen people come in almost at the bottom and you wonder if they're going to survive. And after a period of time, within a year, it can be as short as a year, they've excelled beyond the most talented people in the group that was being trained. And so I saw firsthand that talent really was more of a detriment in terms of our thinking about ourselves. Because honestly, people who are talented, they think they can rest on their laurels and not put in the hard work, and their talent is somehow going to magically take over. And it's not true, especially in animation. I mean, animators, they come into the studio every day. They got to sit their rear ends down on a chair at 9 o'clock or 8:30, and then they have to produce until it's quitting time. And so that's a very specific talent skill set. Sorry, I got my table rocking. Um, that has to be learned. And I remember going to LA to my first job, and I picked up a scene of animation. I was in production because I went to film school. I picked up a scene of animation to clean up. An animator had already done the animation, and they have a cleanup department that puts all the nice lines on everything and whatever. And I went and did it. I thought, yeah, I did a pretty good job. And I handed it to the cleanup supervisor. He's like, "No, you need to take some classes." And I thought, oh no. And so I realized where my position was very quickly, but fortunately they told me you need to take these classes from these instructors. Don't take any other classes other than what we tell you because you're going to get burned. And I did that once and I did get burned. Um, I wasted time and money on a class that I should not have taken. So I followed what they did, and within a year, I was up to par where I was working as an animator at the studio because I had really good instruction. But conditioning, I had an interesting conversation with a producer friend of mine. She does boxing in her spare time just to keep in shape, and she noticed at this boxing place where she's learning, a sign that said, boxing is 95% conditioning. And she didn't understand what that meant. So she talked to the owner and said, what's up with that? And he said, well, this is the place where dreams come to die, because conditioning is jumping jacks, it's push-ups, it's doing all of the menial kind of training that you do to condition your body to get your body strong enough to last 9 rounds in the boxing ring. And without that, it doesn't matter how good you can punch, how good you can defend. If you can't last 9 rounds, you're dead, and it's so true. And I realized, that's something I'd seen in animation. You have to have sort of there is an artistic creative conditioning where you have to sit down and learn how to produce on a dime, meet a deadline, and continue through. And especially in animation, it's laborious. You're just doing drawing after drawing after drawing after drawing, and it doesn't let up. And so you have to have the chops to be able to stay with that. And it's not easy. It takes time to develop that, but you can. And I think, this idea that talent is like this genetic, divine, whatever gifting, or it's not. Everybody's got it. Everybody has it. And if you really are determined and you love it, you're gonna make something of yourself. I mean, if you can sow a field and plant a field and raise a crop, you can be an animator or in any kind of creative discipline that you want, if you have the drive and you're going to commit yourself to it and go through that hard part of conditioning, because that's where people give up.
Yeah, I love that. And I actually like that speaks to me so much. Even I know I have my podcast now, but 2 to 3 years ago, I had trouble speaking. It was like inaudible, and it would always
Yeah.
sound like I was crying and my voice shaking. And it's so funny that I just like didn't let it stop me. And like I think like everyone who doesn't give up has a story like that, and like you shared yours. And I think it's so important to remember that so much of so much of what makes you fulfilled is just having the endurance to not give up
Yeah.
and reminding other people of that same fact.
Yes. Because I think we feel like if we're talented and we're in this creative thing, we have this sentimental idea of what it should look like. But when you get into it and you're actually doing the day-to-day work, and you're not looking at oh, I want to be this successful, or I'm going to be this disaster. What if you're just doing the work, you're going to face hardship, you're going to face difficulty, you're going to face doubt, failure, mistakes. You just need to learn how to overcome those and pivot until you get to the place that you want to be. And the thing is, it's hard work. Just like any kind of job is hard work. Creativity is hard work. But like I said, anybody can do this if they really put their mind to it. I've seen so many people who you first think, man, these people, what are they doing? They're not going to make anything of themselves, but they were persistent, they stuck with it, they got good education, and they didn't give up, and they made something of themselves.
That reminds me, what exactly would be a message you would give to someone who feels feels like they really have a strong desire to achieve something in creating, but just comes up against doubt, specifically self-doubt, because I see this in a lot
Yeah.
of people. What would be like your message to them, or a lesson that you think they would learn from?
Yeah. Everybody's got self-doubt. And it doesn't matter. I mean, I recently, the industry had a big layoff because of the writer's strike and all this. And, I had a guy who had been animating I mean, he was in his 60s, and he's tr calling me up looking for work. And I'm like, well, we don't have anything because we're in as bad a shape as you guys are. But, everybody was sort of in this place where they had to shift, or they weren't really finding a job, so they're reinventing themselves, and a lot of them have doubts. Like here, I'll give you a great example. My best animator, I had him on one project and he learned how to do 3D. We knew he had to learn. We wanted to have 2D animators doing 3D animation.
Mhm.
He struggled through it, but he got there. He understood it. And he animated for like 2.5 to 3 years on this one project or a couple projects. And then I had gotten another job and I was working in 2D, and it was like the renaissance of 2D animation. Oh, we're going to work on these really cool 2D films like Green Eggs and Ham for Netflix. And he came back. I brought him back to work with me. And one of the first things he said is, I'm not sure I can animate by drawing anymore.
Mhm.
I said, trust me, you'll pick it up. Don't worry about it. It'll take a couple of weeks, but you'll pick it up. But it's
Mhm.
it's it's really true. And even in animation, when we do go from one project to the next, each project has its own animation style. And you have to pivot and learn that style because it's not snappy, crazy animation. Now we're doing something that's more serious, more real. It works under different principles of motion and drawing and that sort of thing. And every project is something new, and you can do it. You can change and pivot.
Yeah, that reminds me. I know you are not someone who necessarily believes in this idea of the muse,
Yeah.
and I'd love to go deeper in that and this thought that it's almost dehumanizing.
Yes. Yeah. So I was really surprised. I mean, when I was a kid, I read some books and they talked about things like that, or psychologically trying to trick your brain into teaching you how to draw on the right side of your brain and whatever. And I tried going through that stuff, and it was just such a waste of time. And nobody ever talks about that in animation. So I guess I animation is sort of like a creativity boot camp because you have to know performance, you have to know how to draw, you need to know anatomy, you need to know cartoon design, you need to know timing and how to present something for film because you're doing it to film. It's not like a live performance or anything. There are real limitations and guidelines you need to be following in film. So you're sort of a jack of all trades trying to learn this stuff, and it takes years to develop those skills. And when I was training and getting involved in all that stuff, nobody ever talked about a muse. Nobody talked about inspiration. Nobody talked about these things. You had to sit down and produce. And so that's part of your conditioning is
Mhm.
you're not really waiting for some sort of inspiration because inspiration actually comes out of hard work. When you apply yourself and you start working on something, that's when the things start to happen. And so I've been perplexed recently because I've been reading and listening to some stuff online from some people who are sort of the creativity experts talking about things. And one of them prays to the muse every morning. They got some prayer that they pulled out of one of Homer's books. And they pray to that every morning, and they talk about listening to the universe. And then somebody else is saying, well, you need to get the divine light to come upon you and cleanse you and all this stuff. And I'm thinking, it really is sort of saying that the underlying idea there is that you're a human being. You can't be creative. You need something else to do this amazing thing for you. And so you need to learn how to tap into that. And I'm thinking that dehumanizes us as creatives. We are
Mhm.
human beings. We have this marvelous mind that assimilates, that does all this engineering, that builds monstrous skyscrapers, that puts people on the moon. And we can't make a painting. We can't write a story without the muse. We can do all of this medicine and surgery. Doctors don't have muses. So why do
Mhm.
creatives have muses? And it's just simply, I think there's a couple reasons. One is people are trying to overanalyze what's happening in their brain, and certainly things happen. You get ideas, just like if you're writing a paper or something. You're creative. That's one of the beautiful things about the human mind is the creativity component of it. And as you work it and your craft and skill level develop, things come together, and it certainly takes on a life of its own. And I think that's where people go, oh, okay, I understand that. But most of the people who talk about the muse, they tend to be people who, what I call, are monolingual creatives, which means they do one thing. They've only ever done one thing. They manage to get success in one thing, and they have the luxury because they had such amazing success in that one thing to sit back and sort of think about these things. And they get too much time on their hands, if you ask me. But, I'm not saying that there's, certainly there's certain things of inspiration, and I'm not trying to say that my way is the only way, and whatever I say is final. I believe it is, but I want to be open-handed about saying this rather than just coming off as a critic. But I do feel like there is a dehumanizing aspect that is crippling if you've got to sit around and wait for the muse. And as an animator and working with teams of artists, animators, effects artists, designers, nobody's ever said, hey, I can't do this because the muse hasn't spoken to me, or the divine light hasn't hit me, or I'm not quite inspired by this. No, if you're not inspired, that's a real thing. And you do want to try to inspire yourself, but the inspiration comes from having a good brief, getting direction from a supervisor or a director who's trying to help you to really see that, and then things come together. So part of the conditioning is your inspiration comes out of your work and out of achieving that work and putting your butt in the chair and doing the work, rather than sitting around with a tea and looking outside the window and going, oh, I wonder where my inspiration will come from. We have it within us, and I think as time goes on as a creative, you begin to see that your ability to produce grows, right? Because at the beginning, yes, you're still trying to figure out, and this is what a lot of people struggle with. They don't understand their material and they don't really understand their form yet. And it takes time. We call it pencil mileage in animation. You have to have enough pencil mileage in animation to get to a place where you're more comfortable at doing things. And it comes. You just got to put the time and effort into it. And you've got to be careful not to say, oh, I quit. It's too hard. It's not working as well as I thought it would be. Make sure your expectation is correct, because if you have a high expectation, like it's going to be easy, it's going to be, la la land and lots of fun, there's work there. It's animation, painting, writing, it's all very hard work to be able to pull these things together. And you've got to get past that period in your growth of, one, producing that form, and two, working in that medium, with the tools that you have to know those. But once you got them, it's like a musician. I got to learn piano. Well, the piano is going to be an impediment until to composing, let's say, until you really learn how to use that piano and get comfortable. But once you get comfortable with it, you're composing and you're having lots of fun and you're growing, right? And you're having different
Mhm.
problems at that point.
Yeah, I see this come up a lot for people writing memoir. Like
Yeah.
sometimes
Yes.
I always, specifically people who are speakers, I there's this saying I absolutely love, speak from your scars and not your wounds.
Yeah.
And I think it's so true of even like writing. Like sometimes you can write yourself into healing, but like you can't rely on that when you're actually in the process of writing a book. And
Yeah.
I think in every medium this applies. And
Yeah.
I love how you talk about like multidisciplinary artists. It's this idea that they have to have that belief that they can train themselves to gain the skill of creating.
Yeah.
And I think that's like a big mindset shift for people who have multiple mediums, and other people who rely on the muse in one, which
Yeah.
is very insightful.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So I've often, I mean, you hear a lot today on the internet, do one thing. And that there's some wisdom in there. If you're really trying to achieve something specific, and if you spread yourself too thin, you're not going to get anything done. You're just going to slow down your progress toward any one thing. So it's good to do one thing. But I think also at the same time, we have to realize creativity, I call it cross-pollination. I can get inspiration from music to do writing. I can get inspiration from ballet to do a painting. That's not ballet painting. There's sort of a language between all of the creative arts where you can apply one to the other. Like when I was learning how to do oil painting, one of my instructors said, well, why don't you spend some time doing watercolor because by doing watercolor, which is a completely different approach to painting, you're gaining a little more experience with materials, and you're understanding how, and maybe you can apply some of those lessons there. So I was screenwriting a lot. I love screenwriting. I've taken so many screenwriting courses over the years, and I've written a lot of screenplays. Um, I actually got put on a film that I told the producers the only way I could do this story is if it was a musical. And I said that to shut it down. I'm like, I don't want to be a part of this. I don't want anything to do with this. I can't do this unless it's a musical. And he said, oh, that's a great idea. I can get more money for music. When can you start? And so at one point, I'm sitting at my desk realizing I'm writing a musical. I've never written a song in my life. So I read a few books, and I was able to take my understanding of what I was reading, and what helped me to do it was that every song is a story. There's a progression through the story. So if you break it down into its form and you try to tell a story and you don't make a showstopper, they always said make the showstopper. You don't want to stop the show. You want to keep the show going in your song. And so once I did that, then I was able to write songs, which I've never done before. I didn't have any interest in writing, but I was able to take all the lessons I had learned elsewhere and put them in here. And I think I did a pretty good job. I'm certainly not Stephen Sondheim, but um, I did a fair job.
Mhm. Yeah, that is really interesting because I know you talk about creativity as elevated expression. I'd love to get more into that and how it's connected to this idea of we can learn a set of skills that we can grow in, and that we can become versatile in the places we train.
Yeah. So if you're in engineering and you're like civil engineering, you can, at some point you say, I don't want to do civil engineering. I want to do architectural design, or I want to do something in mechanical engineering. You can transfer a lot of those skills. They automatically transfer. Now you have a lot of new things to learn, and you got to figure out how that new form is working in that world. But those things, we can see that and say, yeah, I can see how somebody could do that. But I think in creativity, we have this monolingual kind of approach to
Mhm.
creativity where we think, oh, you're just a singer. You can only sing. You can't write music, but you can't write a story or whatever. You can. You just got to put the work into it and accept what I call the cost of expression. So everything's got its own cost of expression. Like if you're going to make a film, your cost of expression is very expensive. You need a lot of people, a lot of organization, a lot of time to do that film. And to get there to that point, there's a cost of expression just to get to that point to be able to do that. Whereas if you're going to paint a painting, you just get your paints, you get a little easel up, or you want to write a novel, that's a little bit different. So those are easier in terms of cost of expression. But um, you were talking about the heightened sense of expression. I think that's what you said.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, when I was writing the musicals, one of my actors, we actually got some Broadway actors on the show, and the actor, when I was talking to him, he said, there's a time when a character, when words are not enough, and that's when we sing. And that was sort of my guiding principle as I was writing the music, is that these are internal things where words just aren't enough. They have to sing about it. So there had to be a little more elevated purpose to having this song. And so I think just in terms of creativity in general,
Mhm.
we're not working with propositional truths only, right? We're not writing law books or science books or textbooks. We're actually giving voice where we can marry all of those things that we want to in our theme, the things we want the film to tell, or the project to tell somebody, and then we put them into an artistic form that takes it to a whole nother level of people being able to experience things much differently. Because, like, for example, a book or a film telling a story, suddenly you've got some news story, But then once you put people into it and they're talking about how they feel and how it's what kinds of conflicts and problems it's giving them, suddenly the story takes on a completely different tone, and you understand it from a more sympathetic viewpoint rather than just woodenly literal set of beliefs or ideas.
Yeah, I really love that frame of reference because I think sometimes we, especially like I think for anyone who does art, like they'll think the art is like the only aspect to it, but it's
Yeah,
also like it's the art, it's the marketing,
yeah,
it's how it reaches that person, and
yeah,
that's all a part of it, and that it's almost like this web of impact rather than just the art
yeah,
itself.
yes,
And I just think that's really like a beautiful way to look at it. And I think if there is like a divine aspect, it's this like collective experience
yeah,
because I don't think it's possible to have an art that is in isolation. Either it's
yeah.
inspired by something or it inspires something else. And I think that is really a beautiful way to look at it.
Yeah, I mean, people can walk up to a Picasso and say, "What a piece of garbage," and somebody else can walk up to a Picasso and say, "That is the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my life. Where can I get a print of that?" So there's a very personal relationship that we have with art, just like we do with food. Not everybody likes the same kinds of foods. It's the same thing with our creativity, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think that's a good thing because it allows us to have such a wider range of expression
Mhm.
as artists to reach different people in the world or different audiences in different ways. And you're going to find your audience. It's not going to be this person, but it's going to be these people. So I think that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on competition.
Yeah. Okay. Competition. So yeah, it's always perplexed me. Like we have the Academy Awards. Let's just take the Academy Awards, for example. How do they determine? I mean, how can they really say this was the best film of the year or the best director or the best actor? Yeah, they did a great job, but there's a lot of other ones. But to single out one for that kind of win, and I'm not against competitions. I think competitions are great.
Mhm.
And I think that's something we need to teach our kids. There is a competition, but especially in the arts, when everything is so subjective, um, and all you have to do is look at the history of the Academy Awards and you go, why did they choose that film that is so forgettable that nobody even knows the name of when this film, like Double Indemnity, um, it lost the best years of our lives. Now, the best years of our life isn't a bad film, but Double Indemnity was an amazing film. And I think it should have won. And that's probably not the best example because they're not so far apart, but it was just surprising to me that the best years of our lives won over that. And it was more of sometimes cultural things or things happening in the social environment at the moment tend to take precedence in the Academy Awards, like, oh yeah, that's a really important film or that's a great film. When creatively and artistically, if it depends on what we're looking at for our values. So even at that level, are we looking for things that are reaching our culture in terms of the social things that are happening at the moment? Or are we looking at something more transcendent that is more creative? So competition has a place. And I think the good thing about competition is it brings artists together and it gives them
Mhm.
publicity. And there's a social component where the artists are being able to mingle. So those opportunities and festivals are absolutely fantastic. But I just find it odd that, one person wins one film when there's so many other ones that are so good. And I've even been to festivals where nobody should have won, and yet somebody wins. And it's like, I wonder, I wonder how, I don't know what I think about that. You give a best picture to a very terrible film, what would stop a film festival from saying, you know what, nobody really measured up, nobody's getting this award. Sorry.
Mhm.
I mean, that's a legitimate thing to do, I would
Mhm.
say, but
Mhm.
um, yeah, I don't, it's a complicated thing, and I haven't got my head completely around that yet. So, and I may never will.
Yeah, I'm really interested in this idea of competition because I talk about the idea of like having a competitive gut, heart, and mind, and like the idea of like someone with a competitive gut like goes
Yes.
around and like is fighting with everyone on their team and outside their team. They're just very aggressive, and then someone with a competitive mind thinks it's their team against the other team, and they have to
Yeah.
hate the other team. And then, like, the idea of a competitive heart is someone who really thinks that being their best self means that everyone else's performance will elevate.
Right.
And, I speak specifically to heartfelt creatives. So I do a lot of talking about the heart specifically, and I just think heart power is so strong, and that's I personally am like very competitive, just because I always grew up that way, but I'm never hateful.
Yeah.
And I think that's like really important is this idea that people can come together and rally against something that they believe in.
Yeah.
And also I don't take it to heart when I lose things because I
Yeah.
always I always see how I could have improved.
Yeah.
Even if it's like winning, like it's like I think everyone has that voice in their head
Yeah.
that says, well, I could have done this better.
Yes.
And kind of like rising to this occasion that internally in your heart, you know if you could do better or
Yeah.
if you did your very best. And that's something that always guides me.
Yeah. So it is a good dose of humility. I think artists need humility. And
Absolutely.
whenever a competition brings humility out of you, that's a good thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing. But you also have to realize, it's very subjective sometimes, because nobody's really doing their best all the time. You're struggling, but you are your own competition, right? You should always be
Hmm.
thinking of being better than you were last week or yesterday or last month. Is there growth happening in your work? And that's a very good competition. But that's not the only competition. Like in animation, what you'll find is that once you're in a team, animators suddenly feel the competition because they're being compared and the director's watching who's growing, who's doing this, who's stagnating, who's doing the best performance for this, and they want to advance themselves. So the fact that they're working as a team with other people and they're helping each other, right, which is the
Hmm.
great thing in animation. There's a lot of collaboration, a lot of help trying to help each other do better performances because everybody sees your performance up on the big screen, right? And you don't
Hmm.
want to put a bad performance up there. You want your animation team and your animation director to make sure that's the best thing you could do and not be embarrassed by it. But
Hmm.
you don't always win those. Sometimes you just have a bad day or you're not able to do something. And that's just reality. I've seen professionals struggle when they go into a new film and they're just not able to get it. Um, we had to do a big change in our production team, our animation team, when we shifted from one film to the other. And there were a lot of some of my best animators, they couldn't get this new style. And so we had to find ways to either move them to another production or give them things that they could do on that production where they weren't struggling so much because the struggle just shows.
Hmm.
So it's a very odd thing that I was not ready to see that happen. I was not expecting that at all, but it is true. And I can see what the problem is, was at the time. And a lot of it is just capacity as well. As like I had one of the most legendary animators working for me, and what we generally try to do is cast people. You get this character and just focus on that character. Learn that character, be really good with that character. That's your piano. So we're not going to give you the saxophone, we're not going to give you the flute, we're not going to give you the drums. But unfortunately, we just didn't have the inventory coming through the production at time. And so people are waiting for a scene and I've got two scenes. Which one do I give them? And neither of them were the scene I gave this animator. So at one point I'd given him four different characters in this production because it was just a disaster in terms of the production pipeline. And then I was forced in a position where I had to call him up, said, man, I've got another scene for you. It's this character. And he just said, I can't do it. you've got me at my limit. I can't learn another character because you have to learn the character every time you get a new scene with a different character. So, there are limits to everybody, at some point, and you just got to be sensitive to that. But if we had plenty of time, he could learn it. But the fact that we were under a deadline, he had to produce, and he had to produce under a certain standard of quality. He's like, I can't do it. I can't do it. So I don't know where I was going with that.
No, I think it's really interesting. And it's very fascinating, all of your experience, which is so exciting. I wanted to ask you a few questions about Creativity Underground and
Yeah,
you
sure.
taking your experience and helping others with it. I just want to hear what makes this first, can you explain Creativity Underground and then what makes it unique?
Yeah. So I'm shifting into doing more live action stuff and producing in my career, and I'm setting animation aside. I mean, the animation industry right now is really tanking. It's really a hard time, and I've done it for so many years. I'm wanting to move on and do a lot of the stories I want to tell as a writer and a director don't really lend themselves to animation now at this season in my life. So I'm shifting into more live action stuff. But I felt like in that process, I have all this information and understanding that I want to help people. Like the first most immediate thing is I could write about what you need to know as an animator. So I'm thinking of doing something called 101 Days of Animation, which is an email kind of thing that
Mhm.
you would get an email every day with something that was really I've seen happen to even pros, things you need to be watching out for. So it's sort of taking my animation direction stuff experience and just giving that in a bunch of emails like for 101 days just to kind of download everything I've learned because there's a lot of things I've learned that I find people don't understand yet, even who've been in animation for a while. Because I come at it from a filmmaker standpoint rather than
Mhm.
an artist standpoint. Um, the second thing is Creativity Underground because as I've raised four children, all of them are in the arts. I've seen them struggle. And it's made me see myself to reflect on the struggles I had when there was no internet. All you had was the library and the local bookstore that was just, selling awful stuff. Um, and then I've been training artists for years. I'm on career days. I'm seeing hundreds of portfolios a day, and I'm seeing that their schools are not necessarily preparing them the way they should be. Some are great. There are great schools, but there's some schools that just have you just know before the person they come and they say, "Well, I'm from this school," and it's like, okay, I've set my expectation because I know what your school
Mhm.
is really
Mhm.
doing. Um, so and I've coached even professionals because they come to me and sometimes I would actually sit down and go out with my animator, pick one animator a day, and I'd go out and have coffee with them just to see how they were doing, what's going on, what kind of things are they wanting to do, so just to give that open personal one-on-one time because it's often intimidating for an artist to talk to a director, right? Because
Mhm.
you're the director, um and so I was able to see the kinds of struggles. But I realized that my understanding as a youngster of creativity was so wrong, and it made me make choices that were devastating in some cases. I lost lots of opportunities. I took failures badly and didn't move through those when I was just right at the precipice of doing something great. So I've seen the dangers of that. And I'll just give you one short story. Um, I when I went out to Los Angeles after going to film school, I went to film school. I taught myself art. I taught myself animation, and in my own program that I developed in film school. I went to Los Angeles, showed my portfolio to some studio where one of the old generation, old guard animators was working, and he was just there really to review portfolios and help youngsters. And he looked at my portfolio and asked me, "So you didn't go to art school?" And I said, "No, the art school I went to, I looked at the senior show and I just thought it was awful. I didn't like anything that they were producing out of their senior show. So why would I go to the school?" And he said, "Well, you've made the biggest mistake of your life. You're going to struggle in animation, and I don't know what to tell you other than good luck." basically, and he shooed me out the door. And it was like, oh, that was so demoralizing. Um, but I got a job within a week in production, and then I got these guys who took me under their wing and told me what classes to take. And so I developed, and I knew because I was right there. That was my underdog moment, and I think being an underdog is often a great place to be because it makes you work your butt off. Um, so where was I going with that? So I've enjoyed basically over 30 years of almost constant employment in animation, which is even unusual for some really good animators. You know, it's a very volatile industry, and somehow I've managed to make a decent career out of it. And that being a director, you know, which is a lot of people try to get to, and they never the opportunity just never comes their way, or you know, it's a hard thing to get into, but I managed to get into it. So especially, you know, I mean, you're going to face discouragement. You're going to face people saying, "Yeah, you made the biggest mistake of your life. You know, good luck." Just keep at it. You know, I didn't know anything different, and I was just stubborn and pigheaded enough to say, "No, that's not going to be me. I'm gonna do this. This is what I want to do."
Yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit more about how to handle criticism.
Yeah. So criticism, you always have to take it with a grain of salt and consider the source.
Hmm.
Um, Criticism, there's like three buckets I look at criticism. It's right on the money. You've given me, you've pointed out my flaw, and you've told me how to fix that flaw. Then there's people who just say, "Oh, I don't like that. It's because of this reason." They've identified the flaw, but they have not identified what the problem is and how you can correct it. They say they do. They'll give you all kinds of ideas. You'll find this, especially if you're writing scripts or novels. People say, "Well, I don't like this. You should have done this and this." Like, no, you pointed out the problem, but that's not what I should have done because that would destroy all these other things.
Hmm.
And then there's people who just criticize. They haven't pointed out a problem. They're just belly aching, and a lot of them are frustrated creatives themselves that never got anywhere, and so they're just pouring out their venom on you sometimes,
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
you just have to take it. I mean, you know, I just recently did a campaign for just gauging interest. All we're doing is gauging interest to see if people wanted to fundraise, be part of an equity crowdfund on a feature film, a Western that I'm doing. I was surprised at all the comments that people would make. One, that they didn't understand. Most of them didn't understand what this was for or what. And I even had some people just lamb blast me for the weirdest things. And I'm like, what is this? How do you know that? I had one guy say, well, has the script placed in any of the main screenwriting competitions? Because if it hasn't, it's not ready for funding. And I wrote him back. I'm like, I don't know what planet you're on, but there's nobody in the industry who demands that a script place in a festival before production. This is business. Hollywood's a business. It's not playing games with festivals. You know, yeah, they'll buy something from a festival, but that's not their bread and butter. So he didn't understand that there's other ways, because I always get feedback. So I pay for professional script coverage when I'm writing a script at various stages, just so I can check myself, because you can really get lost in your own brain and not have objectivity. And so it's helpful to have the outside feedback. So I've been doing that all along, and getting blistered sometimes, but you know, it's produced, I think, a really strong script, but you know, you just don't know where the criticism's coming from, and you have to, especially on social media, because it's so easy to just spill out whatever vomit you want to on somebody. And it's like driving a car. You know, you scream at people for driving a car. "Oh, you idiot, you cut me off," whatever. You know, we do that in comments. You know, it's like the computer is our windscreen in our car that we can just scream at people, and we have this sense of protection, and we don't realize there's another human being on the other side of that comment. Do you really need to say anything? Do you really need to be that? Maybe you need to think about it. And this is something I do a lot now, is I'll just think about it. If I have anything to say, that, especially if I'm answering somebody, I want to make sure I'm using a clear head and I'm not getting too aggravated about something. And basically, I don't even comment anymore because it's just a losing game. I don't waste my time on that. But we raise twice as much, or we have soft commitments for twice as much as we were hoping to get. So it actually went very well.
That's awesome. If you have one message you want to leave everyone with here today, what would that be?
Um, Believe in yourself. If you really have a desire, you'll find there's hurdles. Everyone faces the same hurdles. Somebody's who's you think is super talented, they had to struggle as much as you did. I had a friend who somebody came up to him and saw him sketching in a coffee shop, and he's doing beautiful work. And she said, "Oh, you're so talented." And he looked at her and he said, "Honey, I've worked hard for 8 years to get to this point. I'm not talented. I've just worked hard." So you can work hard. You're going to face obstacles. You're going to face frustration. You're going to face those dark nights of the soul. The question is this the battle you're going to face creatively and move forward with it? So, I got more to say in my Creativity Underground course once it gets on. So if you go to creativityunderground.com, you can sign up on a wait list. And when it comes out, I'll let you know. And, I'm basically downloading everything I know about creativity and giving it to everybody. And it's sort of my sayonara to the animation industry, even though I've got the animation thing, but I've also got the creativity thing that I'm more passionate about. Because I know the struggle, I know the pain, I know the confusion. It really is more difficult than people make it. But you have to have the right expectations to understand what challenges you're getting yourself into so that when you face them, you're not going, "What happened?" You're going, "Oh, that's right. This happens to everybody."
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. What an offer that you are giving to people today. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you, Katie. It's a pleasure.